first off, I just watched your movie. It's really wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Why don't you start by talking to the audience and just explain the premise of the film and set up the story for people.
Yeah. The film takes place in New York City. It's a story about a family that is reunited after 17 years, had been separated due to visa immigration issues. And so at the top of the story, they are reuniting for the first time after 17 years at JFK Airport. And we follow the journey of them rediscovering one another, themselves and one another, and using dance as a tool to make those discoveries.
Now, you're both the writer and the director. Um, Talk about where the story came from inside you. How did you develop the script and then try to bring that to the screen?
So it's inspired by the relationship of an aunt and uncle of mine who were married in Tanzania in the mid 90s. And my uncle, soon after their wedding, my uncle got a student visa to come to the US and came with every intention of bringing my aunt and my cousin right behind him. And to this day, have been caught in this never ending cycle of visa applications and rejections and applications and rejections, but are still hopeful that one day they will be reunited. My uncle calls every weekend and he sends money, and my aunt's built a home, and my cousin's in college, but they haven't seen each other for over 20 years. And so it was kind of the what if story. What if Auntie finally got her visa and that's no longer the mountain that's in front of them? Where do they begin at that point to meet each other? How do they begin to relate to each other at that point? And so, it kind of took, I took that aspect, sort of like their circumstances, and sort of projected my own storytelling on where it might go and what might be the circumstances under which, that could happen, and decided to use dance as kind of a metaphor and a third language for them to use as they are trying to rediscover one another.
It's a very familiar American story in a way because the immigrant experience is so common to Americans, but different, obviously, because of it's an African story. And talk about how you took a story that's familiar and brought this new element to audiences, and what that meant to you to try to bring a different cultural lens to a familiar story.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was just wanting to talk about people that I know, people that I've met, people that, I've heard stories about, just even in terms of just like the cab driver, that I've driven in his cab, and he's talked about his family back home, and sending money and maybe going back every so often and maybe not, and the other family that he has here, different things like that. I've lived in New York for over 20 years now, and I consider New York very much to be my home. um, and you're right, we do have a very large immigrant. Everybody here is an immigrant of some sort, from different, from some place. But we all have a lot of the same stories, or a lot of similar stories, and a lot of similar circumstances. Um, and that's something that I haven't seen represented on film before. I love Spike Lee and I love the movies, and that's part of the reason that I live in Brooklyn, is because of, Spike Lee's films. But his films don't tend to cover African people. Neither do Woody Allen's films, in terms of his depictions of New York. And so wanting to just kind of like create a little space, those guys that you see selling incense and, oils on the sidewalk, like, who are these people really? Who is this cab driver? Who is, whoever that you run into? And they're not all cab drivers and toilet cleaners. Some of them are executives and other things too, but just wanting to have a little bit of space to tell that story.
Yeah, yeah. It's got a beautiful visual style, and I wanted to hear a little bit about what was your concept in shooting these scenes, because some of the stuff, they're pretty ordinary circumstances, but you've made them look beautiful. And
Thank you.
I'm just sort of curious about what you were thinking when you were shooting some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I had a wonderful collaborator in my director of photography. His name is Bruce Francis Cole. And he was definitely my right hand guy in terms of deciding and like really thinking about how to tell the inner story of these characters. Wanting New York and Brooklyn in particular, because we shot everything in Brooklyn, to be a character in the film. Um, but also wanting to have each story, each person's point of view be unique as the story is. And so for Walter, you know, our influence was a lot of slow cinema, work on why, you know, things of that nature, where there's a lot of sort of longer shots where we see him sort of placed between two objects, a doorway, a window, whatever it is, two harder spaces, again, to sort of talk about him being between two hard spaces. For Sylvia, you know, she's young, she's energetic, so a lot of movement in the camera, all handheld. And for Esther, because she's observing, she's taking in, she's experiencing this new place, and also sort of trying to figure out who's been here before her, and you know what she's actually seeing. So a lot of close shots, a lot of you know, so a change of lenses and a change of color in terms, and slower, you know, some handheld, some not, and trying to just basically give a language, a visual language to each character to give a little bit of insight as to what their internal struggles might be.
Out of, I know it's like choosing your babies, but did you have a scene that was the most meaningful or to you the most powerful in the movie?
That is like choosing my babies. I don't know about the most. I mean, there's certain ones that resonate
What's
for
the
me.
one that resonated the most?
Yeah, I'll say one that resonated. You know, I really loved all of the intimacy scenes between Walter and Esther. In particular, you know, the first one, the first night that he arrives and he walks in and she's ready. She's ready to go, and she's been waiting. And not just because it's a sex scene or it's a non-sex scene, but you know, just like the tension and the carefulness, you know, at that point, especially, they're still trying to be so careful with each other. And it was just so much fun to work with them on creating this really awkward moment to something that should be, I guess, celebratory or something. But more so than that is also the celebration of just seeing like two consenting African adults having some sort of intimacy on screen, which is certainly it's not something that I've ever seen before. And is, you know, you never really get to see consensual intimacy between Black people, African people in particular. And so those scenes in general to me are like such a victory that, you know, I was able to include that in my film.